Hello everyone, my name is Hazel Berry and welcome to another episode of a series of Fruitful Events. And this is a series in which I will talk about all the fruitful things I've learned that I think could be a benefit to you. Thank you for coming back to my channel and being a part of the series. I wanted to take this time to thank my cousin Colin, who is my editor for my series. I just want to give him a shout out and just thank him for the work that he's doing. So shout out to you, little bro. And I also want to shout out my friend Natalie, who does my hair for every episode. So shout out to you, sister. You're a real one. Love you down. So I took to Instagram to ask all of you what you think the next episode should be. And I did end up making a list and I put it out there to see what you guys wanted to do. And as the universe would have it, the next episode here is about building a support system. As I mentioned in the previous episode of a series of Fruitful Events, we discussed the topic of change and how to trust yourself in the process of going through it. And with that being said, towards the end of that episode, I touched on how one of the strategies that I use to cope through change is to rely on and use the support system around me. So what does it mean to have a support system? How can we recognize what a support system looks like? And also, what is the relationship between you and said support system? There are three things that come to mind when I think about building a support system. And those three things are the following: how building community starts with you, and also how your environment shapes your reality. And lastly, the relationship between independence and community. Part one, how building a community starts with you. Have you ever noticed that when anyone receives an award or an accolade, when they give their speech, they say the age-old phrase, "It takes a village"? And while I do agree with that sentiment, I also believe that it's important to highlight and keep in mind how in order to have and receive support from said village, it all starts with you. So what does it mean when I say that it starts with you? To me, it means being able to recognize the power that you have when you interact with the community around you. And part of being in a village means knowing what your role is and knowing how you can be of benefit to the village, and as well as how the village can be of benefit to you. It's kind of reminiscent to the plot of Encanto, so just keep that in mind if you have seen Encanto, so just walk with me as I continue. It's always great to have a support system to lean on, but it is also just as important to be your own support system if all else fails. I'll explain these concepts more in detail later, but I kind of want to go back to the question, if building community starts with you, where do we start? I think a great place to start is to figure out a little bit of who you are and the kind of communities that you want to be a part of and you feel that you are a part of, that you want to take space in. And with that being said as well, being aware of what is out there in the world for you to explore. And what are the things that you kind of want to get out of those specific communities when you do put yourself in those situations. For example, if you're queer, like going to queer spaces will help you feel connected to your community. To take it a step further and be a little bit more specific, what kind of people do I want to interact with when I do end up in a queer space? And what do I want to feel when I am in a queer space or in any kind of space, in any kind of community that you take part in, for that matter? Does the places that I go offer or fulfill these kinds of needs? 9 times out of 10, you're not going to really know the answer to any of these questions until you put yourself out there and see what it's like. If you can't bring yourself to participate with the community in this or any kind of capacity, something to always keep in mind is that the internet is available to us at all times. And there are forums, there are websites, there's media, there's social media apps that are all out there that can help you feel connected in more ways than one. With all of these options comes a rather obvious thing to point out, which is that the people in your life, whether at school or work or home, can also be safe spaces to go to as well. Because at the end of the day, there are people within our vicinity that we can go to, and there is always going to be someone that you can feel is a safe space. However, with all of these different avenues to explore and find community in, also comes the awareness that you need to set boundaries. And surprisingly enough, And say it with me, it all starts with you. Part 2, your environment affects your reality. Have you ever heard of people saying that if you have a messy environment, you have a messy mind? I don't know if it's that exact phrasing, but let's just walk with that. You know, it's funny because a couple years ago, I was at RuPaul's DragCon in 2018, and I was there with a bunch of my friends, and me and one of my friends had decided to watch a panel with RuPaul in it, and it was also with Mali Roncal, who I believe is Beyonce's makeup artist, and Michelle Visage. And I believe the topic was around the relationship between social media, but I think it might be a little bit more broader than that, but that's vaguely what I remember. They brought up a very interesting point, which is that the media that we consume, whether online or in television or in the news, can mold how we interact with the world. And I feel like that goes without saying. But when they pointed that out, they specifically went into bringing up how if we're not aware of the kind of boundaries we want to set in relationship to what we consume, it can affect our relationship with the environment around us. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with building a support system? And to that, I say, it has everything to do with building a support system, Mary. We know that when it comes to social media, when we interact with it, it creates an algorithm that kind of feeds you everything that you've been kind of looking at when you interact with social media. It's interesting because I feel like this is something that every Gen Z or millennial knows, but to anyone that is not those two age groups, now you know. But let's go back. If all we consume in media are things that confirm our biases that we already have, we have a hard time being able to empathize or inform ourselves of things that are possibly on the other side or things that are out of our realm of understanding. The same concept kind of applies to how you interact with the communities that you take space in. Now, I was never good when it came to math, especially when I was in middle school, but I remember my eighth grade math teacher was saying to me, and he always said this to everybody, and it was interesting. He would say to our class, if you sit next to stupid, you will be stupid too. And I always saw this as like, if you sit next to a kid who isn't as bright when it comes to math and you try to attempt to cheat, you're essentially setting yourself up for failure because you're getting information from a kid that doesn't know any better than you do. And then when I got older, I would often come back to that quote of, if you sit next to stupid, you'll be stupid too. And I found a different way to view this quote. Now, in previous episodes, I talked about how I grew up having codependent relationships with friends. And I had to realize at some point, once I became an adult especially, that the reason I was around so many codependent people was because I too was codependent. And the only person that can really change that narrative and the environment that I was in was me. When I became an adult, I sought out friendships that reflected the kind of person I wanted to be. And not to say that I wasn't friends with people that were in my same level or same level of understanding. It's just to say that I wanted to broaden my horizons a little bit. And while it is great to have people to look up to and lean on in that way, I also had to learn that there would come a time where I would have to apply what I've learned from every relationship into everyday life. And I had to shape the environment around me and take accountability for how I take space in it. I realized what my math teacher was trying to say to me was that if I surround myself with people who have one specific experience with one specific thing and one specific narrative, and I only choose to interact myself with that one kind of people or that one kind of person, I've immediately set myself up for failure. I haven't allowed myself to have the opportunity to be surrounded by people who are different from me, that offer different perspectives, and allow me to be a well-rounded person. Maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. When I think about the things I went through in the last 6 years. As I explained in the first episode of Fruitful Events, I came to the realization that if I was not a safe space for myself, I couldn't be a safe space to other people. And I also realized that I couldn't be able to put myself in a position to be aware enough to be around people that were different from me and offer different perspectives to me and allow myself to be a sponge to those things that I needed to learn and be a sponge to soak in all the information that I was taking from the environment around me. For example, if I was around yes men all the time, and I was actually to a certain degree at some point in my life, I was then never gonna know how to handle a no. Part 3, the relationship between independence and community. I mentioned pretty much throughout the entire episode how important it is to know how beneficial it is to have community, but also to be able to be your own support system throughout it all. But what does that mean? What does that even begin to look like? Like, why is that important? And what does that have to do with building community? And to me, it means that while building relationships and seeking community can make you feel connected to the world around you and to the journey that you're going through with life, it's also important to remember that there are going to be some parts of your journey that require you to do things and experience things on your own. I want to mention how solitude is not necessarily the same as loneliness. Sometimes we need to be away from our support system to really be able to know how to conquer the challenges of life without them and really be able to gain a sense of independence. The same way that you would go to college to gain independence, but might have to leave home to do so. The people that we find community in, we have to kind of remember are also going through their own journey. They have their own goals, they have their own passions, they have their own dreams. And we have to understand that there will come a point where we have to set a boundary and understand that we cannot be so lenient with the access we have to a support system. Now, I need some of you to walk with me when I say this. When I say all of that, it doesn't mean that they don't love us or that it doesn't mean that they don't support us. As is with everybody on Beyonce's Green Earth, we all have responsibilities and we all have things that we need to fulfill. And we cannot spend every second of every day holding each other's hands through life. And again, this is very applicable in the context of me when I talk about how I am pretty much a recovering codependent person. There have and will continue to be instances where you're gonna have to make your own choices alone, where there will be certain doors that you have to go through with opportunity alone. You'll have the opportunity to achieve all the goals you want, independent from your support system, but you have to remember that some doors are just meant for you. So I talk often about the matters of independence and relying on yourself and being your own support system, but how can you give that support back to your community? You give it by showing them what you've learned from your time with them and applying it to your life. So when you do reconnect and when it does come time for you to be able to go through your own journey separate from them and being able to come back to them, you have something new to share. And above all, you can allow yourself to live a fully realized life. As a recovering codependent person, I have found comfort in befriending people who are independent. However, and it's funny because it's happening in real time, and I don't often like talking about what I'm going through in real time when it comes to the matters of YouTube. But it's important to highlight that I am in an era where, as I've said in previous episodes of Fruitful Events, that I am on a pursuit to find my independence and find my own voice. Every chapter of my drag career up to this point, I found that I relied on or needed someone to be with me while I embarked on my journey. And it's great that I did that for the time that I did that, because it just made sense for where I was in that space in my life. However, at some point, there was going to come a time where I was going to have to step into my own journey and make my own mark as Hazel Berry. And this passion project that I'm working on, Fruitful Events is my opportunity to do exactly that. But I would be remiss to mention that I would not have been able to find this voice if it weren't for the fearlessness that I had to find when it came to seeking out my community and help me get to a point where I can realize that I am capable. I fucked up so many times on my journey to get here, and I also know that I'm going to continue to fuck up because that's just how life goes. But there's a little bit of a calm that's kind of come over me now where I'm aware that although I'm stepping in to new territory when it comes to finding my voice and my independence, I'm also very aware that I am a testimony to how the love and the passion people have poured into me, I can do for myself just as well. And the love and the passion that I have poured into myself can now be poured into you. And now that we're here, it's up to you to decide what you want to do with this information. If you enjoyed this third episode, which I didn't, no, I'm kidding, please give it a like. Please give it a comment, a share with your loved ones. And before I leave, I would love to know, how do you build a support system? I hope that you've been enjoying this series just as much as I have. It's been challenging. I'm not going to hold you, but it's been really fun to kind of stretch the parameters of my skill set with filmmaking and with storytelling and with public speaking. So we out here, y'all. And I look good doing it. Argue with the wall. And with that said, until next time, stay juicy.